There are loads of tutorials on getting into TTRPGs. Nevertheless, the question is always asked. How do you introduce someone to the world and community of role-playing games? And well, that question is a difficult one. So rather than trying to turn the wheel, I decided to consolidate all the information I found into a clean and concise video that you can skip around. So feel free to check the description box and skip around to find the answers for every individual question. So today, we're going to be talking about how to introduce new players into TTRPGs, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, or whatever RPG you're playing. And note, this video isn't talking about technical things you need in order to get into RPGs. This isn't talking about the supplies you're going to need either. So if you're looking for a tutorial on, say, the right battle mat, the right VTT, or where to go look for new players or GMs online or offline, or even if you should pay for a game or not, then this video isn't for you. Okay, if you don't want to stay for the whole video, here's your short, simple answer, newbies. Keep it simple and enjoyable. Keep the barrier to entry for TTRPGs low. Don't require your players to buy whole books or huge set of dice. And as a GM, provide a couple of dice that everyone can share around the table if you're playing in person, and if you're playing it virtually, then try to find a VTT that's very simple for players to understand. Don't ask your GM to buy an expensive backpack or some unnecessary minis to start your game. And in fact, make it so that the players and GMs can play without finance or accessibility being an issue. For example, if the book you have as a GM is poorly worded, long-winded, and or hard to find, then maybe don't give it to players or the GM as a beginning game or one-shot. For instance, I'm recently started playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, and while I do enjoy the mechanics of the game, and I very much enjoy the wacky Gonzo style and all of the beautiful tables, I would not recommend running that game as your first RPG. Whereas a game like Roll for Shoes is a great introduction for RPGs because it has simple mechanics, a simple layout, and it's all free and available on the internet. So complexity is really important when selecting and running a game and or playing in it as a new player or GM. Finally, play a game that you know everyone will have fun with and will have a better time learning. For example, it's going to be easier to learn Dungeons & Dragons because there's so much material for it versus, say, Toon's RPG. So, that's the basic advice that you're going to need to start playing and running RPGs. But if you're still here, then you probably need more specifics. So, to start, we're going to explain what is absolutely necessary in more detail. So, rather than explaining every detail in your own RPG, explain the bare minimum on what is necessary and needed to play. Games that are especially complex or complicated can generally be summarized down to a couple key points. For instance, in D&D 5e, a d20 roll plus or minus your ability score modifier, you add that and your proficiency and you can figure out most of your rolls. Call of Cthulhu or basic role playing, you have to roll a d100. You have to roll under your skill score to succeed. These are simple to understand. You don't need to explain a lot to a player beyond, say, the dice mechanics and what those might look. And really, much of that explanation can happen during the game. And rather than even having to explain all of that, you can just use Quickstart rules to help play the RPG and learn the mechanics as you go. Why? Because first off, most Quickstarts are free and many RPGs will have them. They also give you the bare minimum of what you really need to know. The information in a Quick Start guide will include a basic background of what the genre is for the game, stuff related to what is a role-playing game, and what is the GM's role in the required playing tools. Furthermore, Quick Start guides will also include a short adventure and a rundown of the core mechanics. Furthermore, as a GM, I recommend you provide the players with pre-generated characters. With pre-gens, it gives the player an idea of what they can do and what they're good at, and also what are the things this game offers. For example, you're playing an investigative game, and a player gets a librarian character. This librarian character can explain what they're good at in this game's mechanics and what they're not good at. Plus, this might be a personal thing, but If a person who's never played role-playing games before is provided the chance to create a character, that can be super overwhelming because they have no clue what this might look like or what that might entail. So rather than spending 2 hours or plus creating their character, just jump right into the game and give them a pre-gen so they can really understand what is a role-playing game and specifically the kind of game you're running. So, you got your Quickstart guide or one-page sheet that explains the rules of the game, and you have your pre-generated characters. Right now, jump right into the game. Seriously, don't worry about explaining every little thing, just start playing the game. And as you play, then explain the mechanics. Many players will learn as they go. Guide players, and subsequently GMs learn as you go. If you don't know something, player or GM, figure it out later, or if it's extremely pressing, then you have to go through the book. Otherwise, just learn as you go. Another great tip is to pick an established genre or an established setting that everyone will know. It's far easier to understand a game set in the world of Star Wars, Star Trek, a generic European fantasy, feudal Japan, or modern day. It's because these are tangible and don't need a lot of exposition. Of course, this can depend on the group of people playing. For example, folks playing in South Africa and basing that story in South Africa will be wildly different than, say, if I were playing that as someone who was born and lives in the States. So, understanding the context and the people you're playing with will greatly help you choose the genre and established setting. But, very specific time periods or fandoms may add an extra layer of difficulty. For instance, asking players to play and GMs to run a game set during the American Revolutionary War is going to be pretty hard unless you're all historical buffs. Plus, there's also questions of the kind of characters you'd logically be able to play in that kind of setting since, well, unless you were a white cis man who owned land and was wealthy, you really weren't able to do much. So, really consider the setting before just diving into a quick start game. What are your players familiar with the genre? And also, what's their comfortability with the genre and or setting? Also, common tropes to explain mechanics. A iconic class like fighter in fantasy RPGs won't mean anything to a newbie player or even a GM. But saying a fighter is similar to Geralt from Witcher, Valeria from Conan, Xena from Xena Warrior Princess, or Arthur from the Merlin TV show will make a big darn difference, because the newbie will be able to understand that, oh, a fighter is really good at, well, fighting physically. These examples of characters captured the character type and are immediately recognizable. So, whether you're playing a detective game or a rom-com, use popular characters and tropes to explain mechanics. And here's a secret tip, I suppose, for game masters. Run a game you're familiar with. There's nothing more rough than running a system and not knowing how to explain the bare bones basics to players. So play a game you are either A, familiar with that you can thoroughly explain rules in a simple and clear manner to players. B, the rules are super simple and the game is super rules light, so there's not much explanation needed. Or C, you're going to throw caution to the wind and, well, hope you learn as you go, which is the most chaotic option of them all, but hey, let me know how that goes for you. What I like to think is, if you run a game you're familiar with, it'll save you energy, and well, you don't want to be stressed at the table running a game you really aren't comfortable running. So, take that into consideration for your next role-playing session. Honestly, if you keep it simple and you don't really complicate things and you give pre-gens, and you have a game you're familiar with, you'll be pretty good to introduce most players into RPGs. From there, the person can see if they want to continue trying the hobby, or if they just think it's something you'd prefer to watch via an actual play. So, keep it simple, streamlined, and communicate clearly how to play the game. Of course, I could have certainly missed something. In fact, let me know down below in the comment section if there was something I missed while discussing how to introduce new players into TTRPGs. But introducing new players is one way to get players into the hobby. Another idea is to learn time-saving strategies for not only yourself, but for your players, so you don't have to worry about wasting loads of time. And what you've guessed, I have a video discussing how to save time GM prepping for your next D&D or TTRPG session. So check that video out over here. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer host, Blurry Disposition, and hope you all have an awesome day. Ciao.